Hello and welcome to Inside the Recording Studio. You were here with Jody Whitesides and Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Jody. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I can't complain too hard today.
Awesome. Having a good day so far, are you?
Well, it wasn't the super awesome go out and ski kind of morning that I was hoping to get started with, but it is
Why
not
is
bad.
that? Why is that?
It wasn't sunny out.
Oh,
It
well,
wasn't
spoiled for
sunny
choice,
out.
I
Plus,
guess,
there was
right?
a few other things. I needed to create a video for a venture capitalist friend for the Hive pedal.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you'll have to tell me all about that at some point. So
Yes.
what's going on with that?
But of course,
Yes. You still getting snowed on?
we are due for some snow soon. Yes.
Nice. And then the skis will come out again,
Well, yeah, but they'll probably come out either tomorrow or Friday anyway.
as long as the sun's out. And
Yes.
there's no videos
Well,
to
no.
make.
It's not always just about the sun. It just was today. There was other things to accomplish. So,
I hear you.
all right. So today, I believe we're going to be talking about vocals.
We
in
sure
the
are.
Studio.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're talking vocals.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just jump in with both feet here. And first thing is always choosing the right mic.
That is a huge thing. Of course, it depends on whether or not you have more than one mic to choose from.
If all you have is one, that's the right mic.
Yeah.
But other things to be considered is for the vocalist in particular. So if you have a couple of different ones, you might want to try them out and see which one works the best for their voice.
I wouldn't even say might. That's like a must.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's the big thing. What you usually use your Telefunken these days, correct?
For a vast majority of it, yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of my own vocals, yes.
Right.
Sometimes I use a GrooveTubes MD1A, which I also have. And then I also have a few other choices of mics. It just depends on what the project calls for. But a vast majority of the time, I've found that the Telefunken C12 suits my voice extremely well. In fact, in the videos of Inside the Recording Studio, this is the microphone that you are seeing. This is a Telefunken C12.
And hearing also.
That,
presumably.
well, yes, you're hearing it,
Yeah.
but you're hearing it through a couple of different processors as it's being recorded.
Right. So now you kind of sneakily got us into the next point here. When it comes
the
to
right recording chain?
yeah, something like that. Well, how much processing, if any, to do on the way in while you're tracking?
You know, if you'd asked me this question 10 years, it would have been 10 years ago, it would have been vastly different than it is today.
And I'm sure it'll be probably different in 10 years as well moving forward. But,
Probably.
yeah. So, but what are your general schools of thought when it comes to that? Do you like to apply heavy processing going in, slight processing, any, no? What do you like to do?
Well, as I said, 10 years ago, it would have been, let's not do any processing. Let's just you run the mic through the mic pre and right into the computer with nothing on it. That has changed. Now it's vastly different. There is processing going on in terms of the chain that happens. In particular, let's just talk about the chain I'm using right now as I'm recording this here podcast. I'm going from the Telefunken C12 into a GrooveTubes Vipre, which is a all-tube balanced tube preamp, which is a pretty awesome device. I go out of that into an Apollo. From the Apollo, I'm going into a 1073, which is another pre. So I'm going from a pre into a pre, which is kind of a weird thing to do, but I've found that it gets a really cool vibe when I do that. And from the 1073, I then go into an LA2A, and from the LA2A, I go into a Studer tape machine, and from there, it goes right into what you're hearing now.
Yeah. And in full disclosure mode, we're talking emulations here. Yeah.
Except for the Vipre. That's a real hardware unit, but all the other things, the 1073, the LA2A, and the Studer are all emulations.
Right. We're not printing podcast audio to tape and then converting. So,
but if I could, I might. No, I'd
you get
take
the
that
warmth.
back.
Yeah. Right. And so on that note, you said 10 years ago you would have done it differently.
Yes.
Um, question then is that out of, and I want to say this so it comes off the right way, is that because you knew a lot less? Wow, that was easy for me to say. Uh, a lot
What were you
less
trying to say?
about.
As I was more ignorant back then?
No, well, I didn't want to say that, but
I will.
okay, you say it then. But is it more, let's say, like today, is it because you know more what the end result is going to be and what you're looking for? Or is it that you have better tools today, or is it a combination of
It
both of those?
it's a combination of a couple different things. One, it has a lot to do with my mentality of how I like to do things for a mix in a
Hmm.
production has changed drastically. The idea of leaving something as a blank canvas all the way to the mix stage no longer excites me. It
No,
just
that
becomes an added burden by that point.
yeah, yeah,
And
no,
that was the
yeah,
way I used to record things, was to record it as clean, as unadulterated as possible, so I could hopefully in the mix be able to adulterate it as much as possible. And
right.
I've since lost that mentality. I don't really care to do that anymore.
Yeah, not that that's necessarily the completely wrong approach,
No, it's not a wrong
but
approach at all. It's just not the way I like to work anymore.
yeah, and I do want to say I think I saw a clip somewhere with Eddie Kramer, who said that with all the options that we have today with plugins and everything, uh, we end up doing just that. We end up kicking the decision down the line, so to speak,
It is
right? So
possible to
when
do that, yes.
right, so and his mentality, at least at that point, was like, no, I like to commit. This is what I want, and then I don't have to make that decision later. So
Exactly.
but I think obviously Eddie Kramer is an extremely accomplished individual. So I think it takes probably quite a little bit of experience to be comfortable doing that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
knowing what you tend to have to compensate for at the mix stage when you're doing it just clean, and what the kind of processing that goes into it. So if you know that ahead of time, you can steer the ship in that direction a little bit. So if you're comfortable or reasonably comfortable, or even just experimental, I would say go ahead and do that, but be a little bit wary with the kind of processing, because it's obviously, if you're over compressing something going in, it's very, very, very difficult to sort of undo that process, if not impossible.
Well, now you're talking about our next point, which is still
Yes.
part of the recording chain, but
Hmm.
whether or not to compress on the way in. So, that being said, like I said, 10 years ago, I would have not been compressing the vocal on the way in.
Right.
But having done a lot of recording of myself and doing that, I was actually able to improve myself as a studio singer to control dynamics a lot better.
Right.
Nowadays, I have all that control, and I couple that with very light compression using, generally on the way in, I generally use one of two compressors, or one is a compressor, the other is kind of more of a limiter. So oftentimes I will use an LA2A because it's a nice soft compressor, and I don't have to hit it very hard, maybe 2-3 dB max based
That's how
on.
much you like to take off.
Yeah, it's not much. It's
Right.
a very light thing. And
Hmm.
again, if I'm doing it for myself, I don't need much because I've got a lot of control on it. In terms of other artists, I figure out where their control lies. And then I
Hmm.
have to figure out, is this going more for, do I need a smoother dynamic, or do I need something that's a little more aggressive? And if I'm going for something a bit more aggressive, then I will choose an 1176, which
Yeah.
is more of a limiter than it is a compressor, but uh, it's got a lot more it's got a lot more control to what it can do to a sound. Plus, it's more aggressive, and it doesn't have the same vibe as the LA2A. So it really comes down to, does the song need an LA2A? Does it need an 1176? Does it need a Fairchild? It just depends. And I do things a lot more in stages now, whereas
Yes.
prior 10 years ago, it was always, let's get the clean sound, and then we'll just go balls out nuts by the mix stage. And that's a harder way to work for me. now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I do like to, I'm not, I don't sing a lot myself, but when I get projects across my desk here, I suppose, uh,
And what
with
a
other,
desk it is.
and, oh, totally. Uh, but I mean, you and I do a lot of collaboration. So when I get stuff from you, it usually takes very little work, actually.
You're
So,
pretty much getting something on a silver platter. It's
well,
already
it makes my
delivered.
job a lot easier. But I tend to, and of course, this always depends on the track, like you just said. But I like to do the similar process where I like to catch any like quick peaks with an 1176 type of compressor,
Hmm.
usually like a blue stripe or something that I like the mid range push a little bit in there, and then later on, once you catch that, just kind of massage the levels a little bit more with like an LA2A type of a soft knee opto type compressor.
Right.
So instead of, just like you said, just echo that sentiment. Instead of having like one compressor where you're trying to catch peaks and smooth it out at the same time, and you end up just squashing the crap out of it. So,
Yeah. Well, and
um,
sometimes that might be the desirable sound as needed for the recording. It's just
oh,
not a
sure,
constant.
right. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of, I'm assuming you do this more as well, but this is a little bit more at the mixing stage. But at that point, at the mixing stage, I will generally do a lot more automation writing as well as opposed to just having a compressor kind of level out or mix it for you essentially.
Yeah, and that
So
that also has a lot to do with whether or not it's myself or an artist that I'm producing as a control factor. For me,
right,
as a control factor, quite often I already know where the level is going to be, so I will be at that level as needed.
yeah,
And some artists are not as capable of that, so you do have to write. You have to work the volume automation. And on a very rare occasion, there's some times where I got a performance that was like really, really awesome, but something about it was maybe not quite right. So you do have to ride the volume automation. But
yeah, and it could be just even just syllables here and there
yes,
that in words where you might have to take a breath or something like that, or just certain words are just not projected as much. So, but again, that's a little bit more of a mix thing. But I will echo what you just said. Slight compression on the way in, and primarily for my mindset is if I'm working with a singer that I'm not, too familiar with their tendencies or whatever, it's more to control spikes and things like that. Make sure that it's not
spike.
spikes. Yeah, so somebody's whispering, and then the chorus comes,
That just reminds me of the movie Notting Hill. Spike.
sure, whatever. I will plead ignorance.
All right. Feign it
Yeah,
all you want. You know you love that movie.
yeah. Don't tell me what it's about because I can't remember.
Okay.
But yeah, so slight. What about EQ? Do you like to do any type of EQing on the way in?
That is highly dependent upon the vocalist and the mic match.
How about when you do your
When I do
tracking?
me, when you
When
do you.
you do you, Jody.
So,
You do you.
as Jody does Jody. Generally, with the Telefunk and C12, I do not have to do a lot in terms of any kind of EQ. On a rare occasion, I may add a half a dB. Let's see, if we're talking the 1073, I might add maybe a half a dB on the high shelf.
Mm-hmm.
I might add a half to a dB on the low. Generally, I don't. The C12 fits my voice pretty much like a glove.
Yeah.
And that
Okay.
was after an extensive amount of mic shootouts that I made that determination.
Yeah. So we're talking, very, very minute things. And
Well, it's not so much that it's minute. It's the whole concept of like every little step adds up to a lot of step.
sure, sure.
And
But
talking
my
about
point.
going
Go
about
ahead.
the mic, let's real quickly over about the mic shootout type thing. So I went to a friend's studio at one point when I was trying to determine what mic is going to suit my voice best when I was trying to step up my game. And I think we tested like some 15 or 20 different mic models of different
Wow.
mics, of like various awesome mics that you can test. And it ranged anywhere from like a $200 Groove Tubes mic, which is not the MD1A, it's a different mic.
Mm-hmm.
All, to a 414, to a U87, to a TLM 103, to, all kinds of mics. And it came down initially to a U87 and this $200 Groove Tubes mic. And the difference between those two was that in the high end, there was something that was slightly lacking in the Groove Tubes mic, but it
Mm-hmm.
also sounded really awesome on my voice. But the U87 just had that slight bit better. So that's where I started. And we didn't test with the C12. So I didn't have that option at the time. Once I got to the C12, it was like the difference between the C12 and the U87 is way minute. But it was enough of a difference that I made that leap of saying, okay, I'm going with the C12 over the U87. But the U87 is a wonderful, wonderful vocal mic.
Right. Yeah. So, but there also, for somebody who might be thinking about, spending a mortgage on
Yeah,
a new
the
vocal
C12 is
mic,
kind
right?
of a mortgage. It's a mortgage
Yeah.
payment in and of itself of a few times over,
Right.
depending on your house.
But that, is food for thought. That it can just come down to the mic. It doesn't mean that the price tag of the mic necessarily equates to a better sound for you.
No,
You
that's
know,
correct.
so,
I mean, look at
yeah,
Bono or Bono or however you pronounce his name. He's infamous for using a SM57 in the
there you go.
studio.
Yeah.
That's
Just
an
imagine how.
$80, $75 mic. And that's
Yeah.
his vocal sound, but it fits his voice like a
Right.
glove.
Yeah. Imagine how big that would be if he used a Neumann or something. Right?
Right.
But yeah, so it doesn't mean that you basically you work with the best that you got, and
And here's a story I like to
finding
relate about that.
yeah. No, that's
A vocal
fantastic.
teacher at MI once came in and said, if you do not have a mic and you are desperate for a microphone for a vocalist, he recommended the Radio Shack PZM.
I think you've told me the story, but you're gonna have to refresh me.
Well, essentially, a PZM mic is like this
No, I know what a
square
PCM mic
thing
is,
that
but
goes
yeah.
on the wall that catches room reflections or room noise or room sound. He said that when you get that mic and you put it on a stand and you literally stand right up on the microphone and it's like right on your nose, you can sing into that thing, and apparently it gets you a really good vocal sound. Now, personally, I've never tried it, but I know that information based on a vocal instructor. That's in the back of my mind, that if there was no other mic and there was a Radio Shack around, maybe there aren't any anymore, but or a PZM mic of style, I'd go try it just because I've been told it can work.
Sure. It sounds, interesting. Anyway, as an experiment to try, and maybe you can get some really, really cool vocal effects for that. Something that sound really different anyway.
Exactly.
So yeah, so choosing the mic is good. But my point that I wanted to make, just to backtrack here a little bit, when it comes to EQ. Now, assuming that you got more than one mic at your disposal, if you feel like you have to do a lot of corrective EQ going in,
It's not the
that's
right mic.
probably not the right mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So try a different one. Now, also the only time I would do any sort of drastic EQing on the way in, and I equate this a little bit to, over compressing. If you over EQ something on the way in, you might up, screwing the pooch type of thing. But if there is a certain, frequency or something that could be really nasally, and that you're going to have to try to tweak that, maybe try to do that going in. And again, not super heavy-handed, but maybe a little bit going in just to kind of correct it. There could be some rumble in the room or something like that, where you might just roll off something under 60 or whatever.
Sure.
But yeah, again, trying not to be too heavy-handed. So you see, when you're at the mixing stage, you have to go, oh, I wish we had more low end on this. I shouldn't have rolled it up to 500. Yeah. So yeah, so processing going in. What are your thoughts on like there's ISO booths and those little boxes and things like that, as opposed to just singing in the room that might have minimal treatment in it?
I'm going to go take the Al Smith approach.
Do it.
Well,
Preach, brother.
The idea is that you find the spot in the room where the mic is going to sound good on the instrument that you're trying to mic. And in this case, we're talking vocals. So it really comes down to where is it going to sound good in the room? And that comes from experimenting by setting it up somewhere and hearing what's going on once you've got the vocal or the track happening, or you record a test take and then you move it somewhere else and test it again. And you keep track of everything that you're doing. The main reason why I state that is that a lot of times the reason why a vocal might sound dead despite the performance of the vocalist is because of the fact that maybe they've overcompensated by trying to remove reflections. And reflections are what give us life in our vocal.
Right. Now, that's assuming a little bit like, well, what if you have, let's say that you have a really tiny room.
I had a tiny room.
Well, yeah.
I have a tiny room now.
Yes. But that's a good point. Now, let's say that, well, I got a spot to stand. You stand right there and sing. There might be less, room for experimentation when it comes to that. But I think the only time to really try to deaden your surroundings, if you know that you have a lot of like bad reflections and there's just nothing else to go about it, because I know I've received vocal files from artists where you hear just the room. You hear it slightly just in the raw audio, and then once you start compressing the vocal a little bit, it's like it's instant reverb, and it's not good. So my thought on the subject is, obviously, the better room that you have in singing it, just like you described, that's the best way to go. But I would rather have something that's a little bit more on the dead side, just for the control issue when it comes to mixing, as opposed to having to use like RX or something to try to get rid of room reflections that are just not pleasant sounding.
Sure. But that again goes to experiment with where your mic is.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that kind of really makes a big difference. So, but as far as using ISO booths or what is the one that comes out of, is it Sweden or somewhere? Denmark? The one that's like the
I think it's a
box that
Swedish
goes
thing,
around
but
your
yeah.
head. I think it might be Danish. I can't remember. Is that called the ISOVox?
Something like that.
It looks like a leather bound
you
thing.
You basically stand into it.
You stand inside a little box around your head and you put your mic in there. The unfortunate thing is the way that thing's designed. I did look into it a little bit. The C12 wouldn't even fit in it, which is, oh well. But, I think it's a good idea. And there's certainly a point in time a few years ago here where I would have been like, yep, I need that thing, but I didn't get it. I opted to just go with when the heater wasn't running. But I could see if like things were constantly on a demand of like, oh, I need to get this done ASAP and I needed to get a quiet space for the vocal, then yeah, I would look into something like that.
Yeah.
I've been to other studios though, where the vocal sounds dead and then the engineer shows me where they recorded something. And I'm like, the first thing I think of is, why did you do it that way? You could have got a very nice, lovely live sound if you'd have just reversed where you put the mic. So sometimes people will back the singer kind of into a corner and leave the entire open room behind the mic. And that's going to create problems with the reflections immediately behind the head of the singer, for one. And two, it's going to deaden the value, especially if it's more of a cardioid shape or hypercardioid, where it's rejecting a lot of the background. and picking up what's right behind the singer's head. And it's pretty much, for most instances, you want the exact opposite. You want the backside slightly dead, but not dead. And you want to leave the space behind the singer a little bit more open. Give yourself some room. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I guess again, it comes down to the room, right? And see what does it sound like. If you're getting too much, let's say that it sounds really good in the room, but you find that you have too much reflection coming back into the mic.
Yeah, but that's generally coming from the back of your head. That's not coming from the backside of the mic. Generally.
Right. Yeah. So the one approach there could be just, a simple fix. It's like behind the singer, hanging something, a heavy fabric or a heavy something that's just going to stop some of those reflections. So there are little tricks that one can do like that where
yes,
it might not look very cool or pretty when you're doing it, but
it never does.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. So you said having a singer in the room as opposed to an ISO box, even if you had the option, let's say that you're producing or engineering a session, how do you feel about having the singer in the room so you sort of have a better conversation or better contact with the singer as far as like a coaching or something? Or would you, if all things being equal, would you like to have them in an ISO booth, I suppose?
I guess it depends on the personality of the singer. No, just kidding.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to lock you away.
No. You go
are
in the
staying
booth,
in there
man,
until you get done.
Yeah.
Actually, I've done it both ways, and it really just kind of depends on the environment that you have. So some places you're singing in the control room regardless, because the control room is the record room.
Right.
And then there's other ones where maybe the producer or the way the studio works, they don't want the recording to happen in the control room. So you have to be in the live room or a control booth or the sound booth or whatever it is. So it really kind of depends on the environment that you're in. Like the environment that I'm currently in, I've done it both ways. I've had a singer in the room with me, and I've had a singer not in the room with me. And when I do it with the singer not in the room with me, obviously they're tied to everything that they can hear, and I have a talkback switch, and I have to go and control the sounds that are happening just outside the room in the environment that I have where I could put somebody else. So it really just kind of depends. It's a lot more work to do it outside of my room.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah. No, I kind of like the idea of having that person there as well. It feels like it gets a little bit more intimate with the conversation and a little bit easier with visual cues and visual feedback and all that kind of stuff. So
that's because you've got no blockage between you.
Yeah, exactly. So
other than headphones.
Yeah. So right. Yeah, but that can kind of set the vibe in a little bit of a different way. And that leads us kind of smoothly into the next little thing where I'd like to bring up just when you have somebody come in to do vocals, being that, singing is such a personal thing. It's not, you're not hiding behind an instrument, for want of a better phrase. How would you go about creating a vibe and making sure that the singer comes in, that they're comfortable and that they're, in the right mood, right lighting or candles or anything like that? Do you do any of that, or how do you try to read that?
I do that, and it usually comes down to discussions with the artist. Some artists don't really give a flying shit, so it doesn't matter. Right. Other artists, like, they have to get into whatever headspace it is that they need. So at one point, and I can do this as an example on the video portion of this podcast, I'm going to flip on or plug in some lights. Hold on real quick.
Okay.
And I can plug in some lights, and then if I flip out the light in the room, boom. Well, let's say I need to turn this light off too. So, and it's probably going to get extremely dark on the video, but I have lights that are in the back of the room that the singer would face. So it kind of gives them a little bit of ambiance, but it's very low key.
Yeah.
So it's almost dark. It makes them feel maybe more secure in a dark space that they're not being fully lit up. So
Sure.
it helps for them. It just depends. Some artists opt for that, some don't.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I imagine it being hard to sing a heartfelt love song and you're lit up by neon lights type
Oh,
of
I
thing.
do it
You
all
know?
the
So,
time.
right? Like fluorescent lighting, you know, it's like, yeah, this is going to be great.
Of course.
Yeah. So, creating that vibe and that conversation, I think, with certain singers, and you have to be the psychologist there, I think, a little bit, just to kind of get a read on what that person wants, right? And
Yep.
how far you can push them and all that kind of thing. So sometimes you have to, push. Really, you can't do better than that. Or if you say that to somebody, they'll start crying.
Oh, it's not like it hasn't happened.
Right? Yeah. So, but sometimes, and that again, that's just a psychology thing, with different people, how you like to treat them. But I try to just make sure they're comfortable. They have some room temperatured water to drink, and anything else like that just sets the mood for them as best as possible.
Sure.
Which, speaking of drinking and things, drinking and drugs while singing.
Yeah, not a fan. Not a fan
Yeah,
of it at all.
I agree. There's one thing for setting a mood, and I'm not judging anybody for, the how they choose to partake into those substances, but we both know that it could really, really cloud your judgment. and therefore
It's not even a could. It's that it does. It just
Yeah.
changes the reality of what actually happened.
So yeah, and if you need to do something to kind of get yourself in the headspace, just please don't overdo it, because you get like 2 takes out of it and then it starts going downhill real quick. So
if you even get to 2, you might get half a 1.
yeah, depending on the level of substance intake there. So not the police, not going to judge, but I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it.
I'm going to second that notion. I
Yeah.
don't recommend it either.
Right. No, especially with, alcohol. Yeah, you might feel nice and relaxed, but it's also going to dry out your vocal cords and all this kind of stuff. And there's a fine line between you're relaxed and just a shitty singer. So, yeah.
It's that fine line between awesome and shit.
Yeah. Right. Right. So use with caution, I suppose.
That comes from the alcohol side of things. Then there's the whole let's go smoke a bowl.
Yeah.
Or maybe if you're something super hardcore, then you might be shooting up heroin or smoking crack or something. I don't know. But
not in my studio. Yeah.
Not a big fan of that stuff whatsoever. I've dealt with it a few times and it never works out.
Yeah.
In a positive manner ever. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's my experience as well. I'm not a big fan in that environment. You're there to work, so let's work, and then afterwards you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's my feeling about it too. It's like you're here, you're doing the work, you're paying the money. Why waste my time? Why waste your time?
Right. Let's get this done. So, speaking of performing or not performing, that gives us to, I think, the last point that I wanted to bring up here anyway. And that's...
Well, this is the whole part of being a producer.
Yeah.
Getting that performance out of that artist.
Performance. So, but the last part here then is correcting pitch afterwards or going for another take versus, oh, that was a great vibe of that song, but that word was a little bit off.
That's what punch-ins are for.
Yeah, could be that, or that's maybe one of those cases where you go like, that vibe was really, really good. I'm just going to tweak that note in Melodyne or whatever you have at your disposal.
Auto-tune, Melodyne,
Logic
pitch,
yeah,
flex time.
All that kind of stuff. But it comes down to, realizing what those tools actually do. And some of them are great today. I mean, they do a really good job. I'm a big fan of Melodyne. Um, but they're also not magic wands.
No, not by any
So,
stretch of the imagination. They can do some
yeah,
wonderful things, but they are not pure magic.
right. So I think it's important to keep in mind that they're not magical orchids. It's not like, oh, that's good enough. We'll tweak it in insert plug in here, right? But so trying to get it to the absolute best, obviously, is always the best way to go. Whether that being timing or pitch wise, all that kind of stuff. Go for the absolute best take you can do. Obviously, it's not one of those things where, or at least in my opinion, we're like, oh, that's close enough. We'll deal with it later. Because
Fix it in the mix.
yeah, because it's
It's like
always going to
putting a
sound
Band-Aid
like
on
it's
a
fixed.
boo-boo.
Yeah, because it's going to sound like you're fixing it in the mix.
Yes.
If it's drastic enough, it's always going to be a compromise where it's like, no, just do that line again or whatever. The only time, like I said, is if you're really close and the vibe is good, or you're simply just not able to do something, then perhaps it's an idea to rethink the arrangement or rethink the vocal line or anything like that. But
It
if
also
you
depends on your production skill capabilities too. I mean, when people say, "Oh, well, the Beatles would have never done that," and then you find out that, well, you know what? They did do this one thing one time where they slowed down the tape in order to
yeah,
be able to sing something in a certain key or in a certain pitch. They slow it down for the recording, they speed it back up, and it sounds like it's in pitch. Well, it doesn't work quite the same in digital, although it kind of can. But that was them getting over the limitations of their abilities and using the technology they had at the time to do it. So it's not like it's vastly impossible. It's just, if you can't do it, sometimes it's better to hire the person that can.
yeah. If that gap is too wide between the talent level and what the end result is to be expected, or
Yeah,
what
well, I mean,
the
once you
idea
hit
is.
the size of the Snake Canyon that Evel Knievel apparently tried to jump over and failed, that's probably where you're needing to get somebody else.
Get a
Or
yeah
better
get a bet
technology, one of the
get a
two.
better bike.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
better
No,
bike.
the Beatles argument, I think, is it's funny to me because you and I, we've talked about it ad nauseum, but people say, oh, they did all this with a 4-track, or they did this. You know what? They pushed the technology to the utmost limit.
Yeah, they
And
pushed it to
just,
the edge and then some.
right. And I mean, yeah, I think even,
And it's not as pure as people think it is. It's like, holy cow, you are so off base sometimes by saying
yeah,
that.
and just the amazing stuff that obviously George Martin, or Sir George Martin, I should say,
That's
was
right,
able to do
sir.
is great. So I don't think we need to be afraid of technology, but when
Not
it
at
comes to
all.
vocal stuff, just realizing the limitations of what those things do.
Well, and that's, I think, also where the singing gets so out of shape or so far from where it should be. That's where autotune or Melodyne or whatever can't really hide the fact. So people went and changed it and became an effect.
Yes, that's true.
So, for a little while, I think it was called the Cher effect. And then for, I think now it's just literally referred to as the T-Pain effect.
Right.
And so that's making use of really going out of whack just to get a certain vibe out of the technology itself and not out of the singer per se.
Right. But then, yeah, then it becomes an effect. But people still doing that? I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. So to round this up here, I think the usual stuff, right? Knowing your gear, choosing the right microphone that you have. If you have one, that's the right mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you said, even if it's a 57 or a 58, get great results. If that's what you have, then that's what you use. It's a lot better than having no vocal at all, because, I don't have a Neumann, or I don't have a insert your favorite mic. So use what you have. On painting with a broad stroke here, I would say the less processing, going in if you're not sure of what your end result is going to be or what you're going to need in the mix, how this is going to sit. Go ahead. Don't be as heavy-handed.
Right.
But if you do know what you're going for, don't be afraid to commit either. It just, gets rid of one decision.
Well, it
and
probably
less
gets rid of
work.
multiple decisions when you do that.
Right. And mixing stage becomes a lot easier. The cleaner the tracks and everything is, I think it might not have been an Al Schmidt thing, but it sounds like it could have been. But the saying that, record like there's no mixing and mix like there's no mastering. So do the best what you can in every chain there as you go.
Yes. Be kind to your mix engineer.
Yeah.
It's the best way of saying it. Record as awesome as possible. Track as awesome as possible.
Yeah. And it's another podcast, but when you deliver stuff to be mixed, please fix anything that needs to be fixed before you do that. But that's another subject. And getting his good vocal, set the vibe for the singer, feel that out. Be the psychologist if you have to, be the taskmaster if you have to.
Yeah, my favorite thing to tell a singer is anything I say to them, it's not meant to be personal. It's meant to extract a certain vibe or emotion out of them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
if they take it personal, it is not meant to be personal. It is meant to extract certain performance. If they end up taking it personal, that's an unfortunate thing for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we have to keep in mind that the singer is the first thing that most people are going to hear, in the song, and that's what people are going to relate to in the song. So it is important to get the best performance that you possibly can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, vocals in the studio, man. And that's why I do mostly instrumental music. No, no, only half true. But anything else that you'd like to add, Jody?
I think we've pretty much covered what we were going to talk about today in terms of getting a good vocal out of a vocalist in a recording studio type of, well, not even a recording studio. You could do it in a basement. You could do it in your bedroom. It just depends on experimentation and getting the right sound for the song. It's always about getting the right sound.
It sure is. It sure is. All right, Jody, I think that's going to do it for this episode.
All right,
so I'm going to hope that you have a great rest of the day. And
I plan on it.
Sounds great. All right, Jody, thank you so much. I will talk to you soon.
See you later, Chris.
See you later.
See all you on Inside the Recording Studio in the next episode where we will be talking about programming drums.
Woo-hoo.
Yeehaw.
All right.